Hi, my name's Shua. I want to open up about something. You see, not too long ago, I hated it here. Here for me is Chicago. I mean, you've heard of it, right? We've had a play named after it. Frank Sinatra wrote a song about it. Long story short, a famous metropolis, yet even on a busy day in the city, it remains relatively calm. Chicago is a pretty great city. But it wasn't New York City. New York City, a city teeming with artists. You walk down the street and you can't help but bump into one. In today's video, I'm talking about how I've had a hard time in this creative journey and feeling a little bit alone in it. And speaking of lonely, instead of doing this video all by myself, I asked my friends from New York City, LA, and even here to get a holistic view of what it's really like. So let's meet the crew.
So my hometown, where I was born and raised, is Daly City, California.
I'm from Kansas, middle of America.
Born and raised in Chicago.
Born and raised with Pennsylvania.
I was born in Pensacola, but I claim Tallahassee.
I'm from a college town called Gainesville, which is north central Florida.
I am born and raised in Illinois.
I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut since I was like 1 to 18.
I grew up in the city, so I grew up on the north side. Chicago is my home base.
Why are people moving to LA and New York so much? And why isn't Chicago on the map? First off, let's find out why creatives even move to big cities.
I moved to LA because I had an opportunity to pursue some creative opportunities. Unfortunately, they didn't work out, but more opportunities came from LA. So it was like a pretty nice feeling to experience a different level of a ceiling.
Making short films and making movies was always something that drove me in the first place. I always knew I wanted to make movies, and where do you make movies?
You know, working remotely, I started working with Colin and Samir. Yeah, I kind of just go to a WeWork by myself and put a computer down. It was nice having somewhere to go. Just I'd been to the studio out here, and I think I was really missing that physical space as well as the camaraderie of being with a team.
So I was in New York for 5 years cumulatively. In that time, I did copywriting, and then the copywriting and fashion side, I knew that I wanted to work in visual stuff and I didn't really know how to get there. So I took a content job with an interior decorator, and then from there took freelance opportunities, and most of it was magazine work or working with smaller brands.
So actually there wasn't really a desire to move to New York ever. So I made a couple small trips, and then I started to realize oh, I kind of like how everything's set up. I like the speed of everything. I love the culture, and even recognizing that I guess music and movies that I consumed growing up was all from this area. Boots on the ground, I immediately clicked in.
Always from a young age, I think I had these ambitions of either living in New York or LA. When I started getting into photography, which was my first real passion, I went to this photo workshop in Seattle that was hosted by a fashion photographer named Matthew Jordan Smith, and he was the nicest dude. And I had just turned 18 whenever I went to that workshop. He was you need to move to New York City and you need to be an assistant. And I was sold. So I will move to New York City and be an assistant.
Okay, so let's lay this out. I don't doodle, but this is what I came up with. Now this all makes sense. LA has been built and structured for a place of filmmakers, meaning directors, all the like. It has been the home for the traditional movies and TV shows that we have all grown up with. New York City. New York City's structure and build has been the most advertising friendly place you could ever be. I mean, just look at Times Square. For many of us, we all know since the Casey Neistat era, YouTubers have found a home in New York City. And of course, other social medias have had a hand in it, like Instagram, Snapchat even, and of course, today, TikTok. I mean, the city itself is iconic because it's just a giant movie set. Okay, I think I'm kind of understanding the reason of why these cities have been a go-to for so long. I think it's just because there's been a structure for so long of what people can expect when they go to these cities. But it's not only a benefit to know what you're gonna get out of it, but there are people from these cities that have gone to them or grew up there that give a template on how to succeed in a city like that. And that alone sparks a lot of encouragement and inspiration that, hey, if they can make it, I can make it. And to be honest, this has been one of the major parts of the pull of New York City for me. I admire the culture and connectivity of everyone on the same or similar mission of creativity, or just doing something and striving after a goal. And this structure and collaborative culture is here in Chicago, right? Well, I feel like the struggle that a lot of other creatives in this city can honestly agree on is that Chicago really doesn't have a thing.
I think if proximity-wise, it was close to Kansas. Before I had ever gone, it had like a New York feel, a mini version of New York. I always liked New York. When I was about to move out, it was very close in its running. LA was always the top dog.
It might have just been on me, but I never really felt like I broke into like any sort of creative community within the city. I was always looking for it. Like I've always felt if I had stayed another year or if and when I moved back, because I knew there were so many like brilliant creative people. I always knew that like, okay, there's so much more here if I'm like visiting a little more, like putting myself into those spaces and stuff. But I never did a great job of it, for sure. Once I kind of lost that like niche community, so to speak, I was kind of like, I don't know where to go to meet people. It was really difficult leaving. I'm not gonna like sugarcoat it.
I actually did think about Chicago. I did have more friends in that city than I did in New York. There were like a couple other things that I had to like really like balance in terms of my own personal growth and like the kind of like the creative goals that I had for myself. And I think like New York had to be my place for landing.
I was gonna like fire a question back at you that I think would be interesting.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think now we have way more creative hubs around the country, which you can live in and work in and be successful. But whenever 10 years ago now, whenever I was like looking at where my place was going to be, it kind of felt like New York and LA were the only places. Maybe you could do like Nashville if you wanted to work in the music industry. But outside of that, it was like those were your core places. And I'll be honest, like for me, I had spent time in Chicago and I still love Chicago every time I go. But I've never been sure of what the like hub Chicago holds down is, right? Like if New York is like art and advertising, LA is film and entertainment, Nashville is music. Now you're getting like Austin for entrepreneurship and comedy. What is like Chicago's special sauce?
And that is my current dilemma with Chicago. What does it have? What does Chicago offer? This really took me back. It made me rethink this entire video. Because throughout the 5 other scripts I've done of this, I didn't touch on this note enough. Now, a little brief history about Chicago. It was literally built with segregation in mind, meaning different races had their own sections of the city. But back in the days during the Prohibition era, places like bars were illegal because selling alcohol was illegal. But as we all know,
But life finds a way.
small secret venues called speakeasies were invented to sell liquor all over the city in hidden spots. The phrase speakeasy originates from a term that bartenders used where people needed to speak easy, quietly, when ordering at the bar in order to not draw attention to the Prohibition Act of buying alcohol. In order to gain access to these illicit bars, a password-specific handshake or secret knock was required. Though the Prohibition era is long gone, people still tend to speak easy when it comes to their art. So with the structure of segregation and this if you know speakeasy mentality, there hasn't been a path or anyone to show what making it as an artist looks like here. Which kind of makes this whole thing about fixing it and growing something seeming more difficult than expected. After everything we talked about so far, the question still kind of stands of, does Chicago have a creative community?
Everything I do always ties back to the love for my city and the people and my identity and culture. I think if you were to look through my body of work, so much of it centers around like, yo, I'm from Chicago. Because I love it so much. There's just so much beauty and talent and amazing people that a lot of my work surrounds or focuses on is like lifting up those people and places. I can take advantage of kind of that tight network and intimate space.
I feel like the biggest draw to Chicago, one, I feel like it's not filled like as an entertainment capital. It's not filled with entertainment people like New York and LA are. And it feels like, you know what, I can still live a pretty normal life here, even if what I do isn't considered normal. I think it's pretty normalized in LA and New York to walk around with things like cameras or things like that. That's just kind of that's that niche culture in those areas. But here it's probably not as normal. But I kind of like that. When the community's kind of just starting or just growing, it's a great time to hop in with with that, and what a great time to go to something when it's kind of just starting and just beginning to build rather than when it's established.
We're kind of now in this phase of Chicago that reminds me why I love Chicago, because it is becoming more collaborative again, more open again in the creative scenes. I think people are starting to like de-click a lot, which is really awesome. Been here for 6 years, and if it keeps working out well, then sure. But I'm also somebody who like has dreams and aspirations of living abroad, so we'll see.
A lot of these relationships are just built off like true, genuine friendships rather than like a work relationship. And I really like that because, you know, I think community is very big, especially as a filmmaker for myself, being able to have the opportunity to work with other creatives and, you know, like ask them for a helping hand on something. Like most of the time, people in Chicago are always down for that.
I feel like that's the one thing about Chicago that makes it stand out. I feel like as long as you approach everyone as they are, not necessarily like, hey, I see that you do X, Y, and Z, I feel like that could come off more like, oh, you just want to like social climb. Work is a huge part of your identity, but I feel like in Chicago, people don't just rely on that heavily. Like they're also just, hey, I'm just a person, it's just who I am, and this is what I like to do.
At some point in my like mid to late 20s, I want to like really just commit to an area and like grow roots, because I really don't understand why like Chicago isn't celebrated as like the creative city it is and stuff, but like I'm not joking when I say like I legitimately want to move back.
This is not the Chicago I was told. But lately, I've started to taste a new Chicago. Taking a long look in the mirror, I want to find ways to open doors that I wish I had. Us artists and creatives don't have to do this alone. I have been trying to actually work on this. Me and several others recently held a creative meetup, and I was one of 4 panelists to share our experiences to hopefully show how others coming up can get insights earlier. This may work, or at least be a part of helping Chicago creatives to have something to grasp as a collaborative community. I mean, how cool will it be for the creators to create their landscape? After talking with those from my city, I found out that there is something special, and that I was a part of it this whole time. Just a couple of years ago, I felt so alone, wanting more for and from my city, Chicago. Today, seeds are planted, they are growing. It's summertime now, and Chicago artists are blooming.
Yeah, shit. Thank you guys all